This guy's going to be talked about more extensively tomorrow, because we're going to actually go to the spot where his most famous imprisonment was, and we'll be there tomorrow. But one of the other guys that was real instrumental in the Baptist movement here in the state was John Weatherford. And Weatherford is, a lot of people have never even heard of Weatherford, just like they haven't heard of Harris. But he ministered all around the state, and then ended up down here in this section. And he was down here for the last many years of his life. He lived, I want to say, he preached the gospel for, if I'm just saying off the top of my head, I think it was 60 years. He preached over 60 years, lived past 80. And he's buried over here. Now, what we're going to see is we're going to go to what's called Shockey or Shockoe Baptist Church. And when you go there, we'll go in the back of the church. There's a marker in the front. And then there's a monument kind of in the back area. But where he's buried is actually a half a mile away from there. And we're just not going to do it. I'm not going to make y'all suffer through that, because by the time we get out there and get back, it'd be late. And, all that's out there is a little marker where he's buried in a clump of trees, and it just says J.W., John Weatherford. That's all that's there in memory of him. And when you talk about a concerted effort of the Baptists to win religious liberty, he was one of the spearheads of it. So tomorrow we're going to go to a place called Chesterfield. Now, if you can picture in your mind Richmond is a hotbed for Baptist activity. If you picture this in your mind, northwest of Richmond just slightly is Dover Baptist Church, the flagship of the Dover Association. Okay? Now, this brother brought up something about Robinson, wherever he's at. And, I don't always bring up the negative or whatever. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But actually, Weber's son went into Campbellism. Now, so this is a flagship church of the Dover Association. And so, I don't spend a whole lot of time sometimes on things like that. But that's interesting. If you go a little further, Goochland was the mother of Dover. And that was a church where Reuben Ford was at. Okay, this is all around Richmond, right? And then southwest is a little burg, and it's called Chesterfield. And Chesterfield is where John Weatherford was imprisoned along with several other men, William Weber being one of them. And he was there for 5.5 months in that jail. And some of the amazing, we're going to tell you the rest of the story tomorrow, some of the amazing things that happened in that jail, and then how he was actually released from jail, how his fine was paid, and who he was affiliated with. It's all going to be tied in tomorrow, so I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. But he was an amazing individual. And when he went to jail, let me just tell you this part. When he went to jail, none of these guys stopped preaching. That did not stop them. In fact, it seemed to antagonize them. And they preached through the jail bars. And Weatherford was one of those guys that, when he preached through the jail bars, they would play drums to drown the preacher out, or other instruments. They would scream like Banshee Indians. They rode horses through the crowd. James Ireland talks about seeing people get trampled. They would urinate. He said they'd make water in my face. They'd, put urine in a bucket, vomit in a bucket, whatever, feces, throw it through the jail bars at the preacher. They did all that kind of stuff. The story of Jamie Ireland, God gave him a bodyguard to stop all that mess. But anyway, there where Weatherford was at, he preached at the jail bars, and they'd stripe his arms. And he was recognized as the preacher that, quote, baptized his listeners in his own blood. Because he would just preach like a banshee, man. He just flinging her down, and they'd cut his arms with knives. But the neat story is that when he died then, and we're going to go see where he was in jail and everything, when he passed away, there was a young man walking through the line to view his body. And there's a little boy that was walking past as well, and when he stopped, he looked down at Weatherford's body, and he looked at his arms, and he just paused and was aghast as he looked at Weatherford's arms. And the old man stopped and said, "What are you looking at, son?" And he said, "Hero marks. Look at the hero marks." He had stripes on his arms to where he's preaching. They'd cut his arms when he was preaching. And but the man was just faithful unto the end. And again, lived, I want to say lived past 90. Yeah, I believe that's right. Preached 70 plus years is what it really was. And I'm going to double check that, but we're pretty sure that's what it was. But anyway, it's neat. We'll go over here, and then tomorrow you'll hear the rest of the story and see actually the spot. Now what's neat is that they preserved this place tomorrow where these guys were in prison, because they put a monument up years ago, and they have the third jail, not the original, but a jail like unto it. It kind of moved around the courtyard, but it's a museum now. And when they built the new courthouse in Chesterfield, when they built the new courthouse, they kept that box with the Baptist monument, the old jail, and they built their courthouse complex around it, because we thought, well, it's gone. They're never going to keep that. And they built it all around it and preserved it for us. So now you can go on the official courthouse grounds, and it's all right preserved in there. And that's where Weatherford and others were in prison there. One of the other neat stories, and we'll tell this just briefly, a guy named Tinsley was there in jail, and when he was preaching, they erected a wall around the jail, because these men would preach and they'd have more converts when they're sitting in the jail preaching than they did when they were outside, because everybody wanted to come hear what they had to say. And so Baptists gathered from everywhere, and then crowds came just out of curiosity many times. They'd listen to these preachers, and they built a wall, and they put glass and bones and stuff up on top of it. And what they do is, he would still preach up and over the wall. Now, they had a group that they called the Bandana Brigade. The Bandana Brigade would tie a white handkerchief on the end of a stick, and they'd raise it up over the wall, so the preacher on the inside, with all the tumult, noise, and yelling sometimes, he would know that the group was assembled to hear his preaching. And he would preach, and his sound would go up over the wall. People hear it on the other side, still get saved. Other men of God would baptize them. They were filling up the churches from the preachers preaching inside the jail. So they hated these guys. So they left the jail doors open at times, thinking it privily to thrust them out at night. And the Baptists read the Bible and said, no, you brought us in daylight. Don't thrust us out privily. They sat with the doors open at times, resisting, and they're making a statement. We will have liberty of conscience. We will have our own churches. We will preach the gospel according to what God says. And so you're going to see, when we talk about all these efforts, what the fruit of it is. Not just many souls, many churches, but the political ramifications are awesome as well. And so it'll all come together. By the end of the week, all this is going to make sense, hopefully. So, but Weatherford he's a big piece of it, big key. And we'll tell you the rest about his connection with a famous man tomorrow. Amen.
John Weatherford's grave. 1/2 mile west is the grave of Elder John Weatherford, 1740 to 1833. Baptist preacher for 70 years and early advocate of religious liberty. Jailed 5 months in Chesterfield in 1773 for unlicensed preaching. His release was secured by Patrick Henry.
This is the location of the Chesterfield jail, where John Weatherford and other Baptist preachers were imprisoned for their faith. They preached through the bars of the prison. They were attacked. They were cut with knives, but yet they stood firm for the gospel of Jesus Christ. They continued to preach and stand on Baptist principles. Oh, and as you can see, they imprisoned preachers for preaching Baptist principles here, and looks like I'm stuck for preaching here as well.
1770 to 1774, John Tanner, William Weber, Augustine Easton, David Tinsley, Joseph Anthony, Jeremiah Walker, John Weatherford, apostles of religious liberty. Whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. We cannot but speak the things which we have heard and seen. In gratitude for the blessings of spiritual religion and freedom of conscience won through their sufferings. This memorial was erected by the Churches of the Middle District Baptist Association, 1925. Imagine standing and holding a bandana up and hearing some preacher yelling through the jail bars, "You must be born again," and revivals breaking out all around this place. What they did was, the first jail was right here, and as Brother Wall was saying, most likely just all wood. It may have been stone, but the second one sat over here, and the third one is the one that you passed on the way in with the bars on the windows. It's got stocks in the front of it, and then the museum is on the right, and it is open. Again, when they built this whole complex, we feared that this would be gone, and they built it right around and built a courtyard and left it right here, and then left the jail and made a museum. So somebody cares. I'm very thankful for that. Yep. So a ton of history right here, though.